3 years ago, I juried the Extremities exhibition for the Houston conference. There were a ton of images to go through, but a few really jumped out. This picture here, the woman with the fancy claws, was one of them. It wasn't the lobster claws themselves which so caught my attention. It was the image that did all the work. There's something in the combination of the girl next door with the encrusted claws that creates a striking disconnect, and that disconnect got noticed. The key is how to create that scenario for each of us with the work that we already do. How do we put our work in a new and purple context? How do we create images that leap out of the dairy case? Here, to tell us about the unique approach to video and image making is Rachel Timmins. Rachel currently lives in Baltimore, Maryland, where she completed her MFA in Studio Art at Towson University in 2012. Please welcome Rachel Timmins.
Thank you, first off, to Andy, Brigitte, and Harriet for bringing me in to talk about image and video-based documentation and interaction with crafted objects. So before I really get started into my talk, I'd like to give major props to my Baltimore-based photographer, Joseph Hyde. He's responsible for the majority of the still photographs of my work that you're going to see in this presentation. I make objects, not photographs. I want to come clean straight from the get-go and let you guys know that. So I cough up the cash even when I can't afford to, when I need something photographed, and hope he continues to give me a student discount. There are multiple ways that I choose to document work. I utilize professional images, smartphone documentation, and some video. I would like to try audio documentation, but I haven't quite gotten around to that yet. So what makes good photographic documentation of an object or an adornment? I'll list the obvious stuff and get it out of the way, and I would like to note that not all of these things are going to be useful to everybody, especially if you're a very conceptual maker. Some of these things may go completely against what your concept calls for. But generally speaking, the images should be in focus. They should have proper exposure. It should be easy to see what the primary focal point of the image is. Dynamic composition definitely doesn't hurt. Attention to detail, effective lighting, no dirty footprints on the backdrop or specks of stuff on anywhere in the image, and Photoshop wizardry skills I absolutely don't have. And the things that I've listed are mostly taken care of by a skilled photographer, in my case, Joseph. But what else needs to be considered? Mood. Is the image going to be gritty or clean, humorous or serious, calm or lively, dramatic or sedate? And do you have a narrative? In America, we love narrative. And is it clear and spelled out, or is it spelled out, or is it open? Lastly, what about models? Is the model a backdrop for the adornment or object, or a part of it? And that's a really important decision to make. And how does the model portray the mood? And if there is the model, things do tend to become more complicated because you're working with a human being, not just lighting. So if you are a conceptually driven maker, like I said, these questions sort of generally come out naturally in the photograph because you've considered them already. I know that I do. But for more traditionally driven pieces, I really do believe that these questions need to be considered, they have to be decided upon, and they have to be executed with intention. So when I'm selecting someone to model my work, I'm sure to pick someone who's going to make the piece stand out. And it's a very rare thing for me to model my own work in a photograph. This is first and foremost because my everyday appearance clearly stands out, and I believe that I would detract from the wearable objects that I make. This necklace is certainly not one of the best pieces that I've ever made, so I'm not sure if this is helping my point. And even though this shot is professionally taken, my photographer can only work so many miracles. The focal point of this image is me, not the necklace that I'm wearing. I have also already spent many hours with the piece that I've made. I'm too close to it to wear it objectively and to give an honest and accurate representation of the piece with my body language, and in my work, body language is very important. I suppose that picking an average-looking person, or as Andy said, the girl next door, to wear my strange adornments adds a little bit of unexpected quirkiness or humor, but mostly for me, I think it adds relatability for the viewer. It makes it so that the viewer can picture him or herself in the position that my model is in. When worn, my body and hand coverings create a character with a fairly open narrative. And the model's clothing that is worn in addition to the objects that I've created really helps to create that character's persona. If the model is wearing one of my head coverings, I tend to have the model wear black spandex leggings, and the leggings make the model's legs appear to be really slim, exaggerating the scale of the head coverings, further making them stand out and creating a seemingly eccentric, lopsided personality. In this case, I would ask my model to pick his or her shoes, and this significantly impacts the character that is created. If the model is wearing a large object that still allows the viewer to see the majority of the model's body, for example, some of my hand coverings, I tell my model what piece they're wearing and ask him or her to wear something that they think would be appropriate. So I'll generally be prepared with a backup outfit that I know is going to work for the piece, but I have never needed to use it. My models have always brought something perfect to the photography session. I believe that this collaboration between me, my work, and my model allows the model to better connect with the character that I've created because they've made a contribution to that character's persona. Finally, if the object that my model is wearing is of fairly small scale, more along the lines of what people might consider to be jewelry, I ask the model to wear a white, gray, or black shirt, depending on the color of the piece, and fairly neutral pants, if that's an issue for the image. My small work is less about creating an overall character and more about the jewelry becoming a part of the person who's wearing it. So even though the object has small physical stature, visually it looks really large because there's little or no competition with the model's clothing. When I'm having my work photographed, I start by asking my model to wear the object and then to show my photographer how it makes him or her feel. This is generally the first time that the model will be wearing the work, and his or her body language is a really honest demonstration of how the piece makes him or her feel, and I believe this is the key to a really great image. When all of this is happening, my photographer and I collaborate together on what we think might make a good image based on what my model shows to us. I almost always have my work photographed on a white background when I'm having it professionally shot. This is because I'm not rich. I can also not afford to have a publication contact me, wanting to publish an image and then say, but could you shoot this on a white background for us? And by the way, our deadline's tomorrow. We're on a really tight deadline. I have never heard of a publication refusing to publish an image strictly because it is on a white background. So for now, white is the new gradation gray backdrop for publications and promotional materials. I have yet to make work that calls for a specific background that is not white to showcase the piece, and if and when this happens, I might have to change my tune or get a real job. Just so you know, the images that I'm showing here, I just did 2 Google searches, one for gray-dated background jewelry and the other for white background jewelry, and by showing that I'm not talking about how successful or not they are. And the dates are pretty, I think, accurate in terms of when these trends are happening. So grabbing attention via social media is extremely important, or at least it is for me. I feel that this is so imperative to my practice and my life that I have named my iPhone Lucy. Quick cell phone shots can update folks on the World Wide Web of what you're up to, and this also serves as a good time to get welcome feedback from respected peers. I post in-progress images, quick snapshots of finished pieces, as well as professional images. These are a few folks up on the top line that show up on my personal feed pretty regularly, and I always look forward to seeing what they've been up to. The use of smartphone documentation is a new and valid form of documentation. One of the ways this is being recognized is by the upcoming August exhibition in print that's coming up in August by Susan Cohn, as seen by others, and that'll be in Metalsmith magazine, so keep your eye out for it. When I bring my work into the public sphere, my main goal is to document the interaction between the public and my work. I generally do this via smartphone images and video. It's a rare thing that the general public gets to interact with crafted objects, let alone crafted objects that are as strange as mine. This interaction, at least when it comes to my work, is more about interacting with otherness rather than craft. However, I do think that bringing objects that would normally only be shown in a museum or gallery to a specific group of people who would go to these types of venues, and instead bringing art objects into the general public offers education to the public. And with education comes viewers and possibly future buyers. In general, the settings that I use in my video documentation are somewhat planned. although I have been kicked out of a venue or two and been forced to make quick creative decisions on where to go next. But any interaction that occurs is absolutely not planned at all. Going into filming, I really have no expectations. My sights are focused on making sure that the piece is getting put together, that my model is well nourished. These head coverings get really hot and heavy. They're pretty exhausting to wear, which is part of the point. And the reaction of the public really does vary. During filming, some people act like we don't exist. For example, at the Target store, a lady just walked right by us. But at the Baltimore Inner Harbor, a little girl came up and hugged this piece's name, Tiny, right here. She's hugging Tiny. And it was almost like she saw it was other and made a connection there. So other people at the Inner Harbor were also interested. You'll see in a minute. One guy even tried to have a conversation with Tiny. The only downside was that he kept looking at me because I was behind the camera for reassurance or guidance or something. So I'm just going to let this play through. It's really short. And that beeping was an object sensor, if you guys are curious. Craft objects are often viewed as things that should not be touched. This is the Extremities exhibition. They are under vitrines or delicately pinned to the wall in such a way that communicates that even though this object may have a function, you are absolutely not allowed to touch it, let alone use it. Now, I can understand that with museums and galleries comes insurance, red tape, and bureaucracy, and so these rules are in place to protect everybody involved. But this is absolutely not how I would prefer to interact with objects. So I recently showed at the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art, and I asked the folks in charge if it would be possible to have live models wear my head coverings for the opening reception. I volunteered myself to be there to sign away the museum's liability and to work with the models and the work, and they wouldn't allow for this. Later, I returned to VMOCA to give an artist lecture and some workshops to students. Some of the students asked if they could try on some of my work, and the art proprietor looked at the curator, and they looked at each other, and they looked at me, and I said, yeah, totally, this would be great. And then they said, absolutely not, we can't do this. And I guess what all this comes down to is that in my eyes, craft and adornment have lost some of their function because they're not allowed to be used in settings that attract the most receptive audience. Now, I don't want to sound ungrateful for my experience at VMOCA. They were really great. But it certainly was an eye-opener for me in how we deal with crafted objects. I make pieces that not only give viewers an experience, but they give the wearer or the user an experience too. And I think anyone who makes a wearable adornment or functional object can relate to this in some way. But by taking my work to the public sphere, it allows the work to function instead of simply being displayed. And by documenting this experience via use of images and or video, people who were not present can at least have a chance to view the interactions that took place. And in a way, this idea is sort of returning to the relatability that I spoke about earlier. So I don't know if my videos, images, or created experiences help to broaden the public's awareness of craft or making specifically. We're so flooded with images and media all day, every day, that I'm not sure how much anything really sinks in anymore in terms of education on the World Wide Web. What I do think is that if your work is strange enough, or at least has some mechanism that grabs attention, and if your documentation is eye-catching enough, that it will provoke viewers to ask questions about what the hell it is, or at a minimum, to at least form an opinion. When I was shooting the Tiny video, and when I was at opening receptions for exhibitions that some of my larger works have been in, I got into debates with people about what jewelry and adornment is. I think I make jewelry. They don't think that, or most of them didn't. And perhaps that's another discussion for another time. But the point is that the debate was started. They cared enough to ask and to argue with me. So one of the questions that the PDS folks wanted me to answer is about how I came up with marketing my work in this way. I wouldn't call what I do marketing. I'd call it honest documentation. I document large life events, trophy experiences, and small discoveries. I document everything. Sometimes I share my images via social media, and usually I hoard them on my iPhone, Lucy. My unconventional work being put into a conventional context is like holding up a mirror to an everyday experience that I would have, like going to the grocery store, which is rarely an uneventful experience, purely based on who I am as a person. And maybe my compulsive documentation is my way of trying to understand how I fit here. Regardless, part of why I think my documentation works so well is because it's coming straight from me, straight from where I live every day. I know it inside and out. And that is what I believe makes great documentation and great work, living it and knowing it. Thank you, guys.
Okay, let's see if we have some questions for the audience.
My name is Annie Pennington. I'm the associate editor of Art Jewelry Magazine. And so I'm absolutely fascinated with your images. But I wanted to see if you could maybe talk a little bit about the difference in between these really dynamic images that you do and then some of the more traditional images, say for my magazine, what we look for are these, because they have to be shrunk down to this really small scale, a person or a model or any kind of background kind of becomes a distraction from the piece. And so, I don't know, maybe talk about your views on maybe shooting your work in multiple ways to be used in different settings.
Yeah, like I sort of said about white being the new gradation background, I think that you're always safe with photographing on white, period, at least for now as trends are going. I would say that generally photographing pieces on their own for me doesn't work, although I do understand that you can't always have a model. Those might be scenarios where, as a maker, I might say, I don't know if this is going to work for me. If you really want me to be in a publication, we might have to do a little bit of negotiating together. I'm not one to maybe compromise what my vision is for the work purely for exposure necessarily. And I don't know how helpful that might be for anybody else, but I would say white is always safe. And in terms of just photographing a basic object, really clear and really obvious of what it is, and if the highlight is craftsmanship or mechanism, to really highlight that point in the image.
Hello. My question was, do you have any advice for those of us who are also interested in the connection between adornment being worn and touched in a gallery?
I would say always ask. That was my approach at VMocha. It didn't go great, or it didn't work in my favor, rather. But if institutions won't give you what you want, to take it out into the public sphere, that's really the only option. So I always have glitter with me wherever I go. I have some here if anybody wants some. And that's a way of being able to get the work out. And it sort of piggybacking on the pop-up idea, just putting your work out there for people to touch and to handle, I think is really important. The discussions that I had about Tiny and the Baltimore Inner Harbor, I had all these people coming up to me. I have all these video clips, and people would say, "What is that?" And I wasn't prepared for the question, which was dumb of me, but I was like, "It's jewelry." And they didn't feel that way. And it was a really wonderful discussion.
Okay, I would like to ask another question. When you make your work, do you already think about the model? Do you have a personality or a mood in mind in which you would like to photograph it? Kind of to what extent is that planned?
I would say a lot of my head coverings and hand coverings are actually made after sideshow characters. So I do a lot of research on the character, or on the performer rather, from the early 1900s. And so based on who that person is, Sylvia, the magenta hand coverings, they're made after Sylvia Porter, who was really bright, wonderful, lovely. And so I am thinking about that when I'm making the work. My work is really serious, but in order to grab attention, I feel that it needs an element of humor to be able to draw an audience in, to then see that sort of deeper layer.
Shawnee Richards, University of Akron. This question is for Rachel. I was wondering how you get about getting a model, and once you get them, how do you pay them? Do you barter?
I go to undergraduate students, typically the jewelry students, fibers students, sculpture students, and I am broke all the time. So I offer them delicious vegan goodies to take them out for a happy hour after the shoot. I've offered jewelry as payment to them, and I typically will bond with the models. They're often friends, so that's how I tend to work it. But undergrad students are awesome. They're willing to do almost anything, that or friends in the field. So
I'll go for that, and if I need some branding.
So basically the question was, how do I make a living? Well, I just finished out my MFA, so I'm sort of still finding out how that's going to happen. I've been given the opportunity to give workshops in conjunction with exhibitions. The example of VMocha is one of a few. I've been lecturing all over the place. It's been really crazy, an amazing response that people are having. And again, I think that comes from people being able to relate to the work that I'm making in some way, and so they want to hear about it and they want to hear my perspective. I've kind of carved out this sort of weird niche for myself in the craft community that maybe I don't know if anybody else has it, so I think I lucked out. In terms of the work being more fine art, I gotta say, I'm afraid for craft. I did the ACC show. It was horrible for me. I left actually at a deficit. I've been encouraged by professionals in this field, who I'm not going to name, to leave craft and go to fine art. And I don't want to do that because I love this community, and so I'm sort of trying to find a way to balance between the two. I teach part-time. I have a production line. I don't sell very well online. I tend to do better at trunk shows where people can kind of meet and talk to me. And I have an amazing husband who works his ass off as a welder, and he really is helpful. I definitely wouldn't be able to work at the capacity that I'm working at if it wasn't for him. And so that support system is really important. He's also so understanding, or understanding enough to realize that I'm really building my career, and it'll even out, hopefully, over the next few years. So it's just getting out there. It's a tough road.
Rachel, do you have any suggestion on when people are looking for photographers? How do you do that? How do you shop? What type of questions would you ask?
I will be honest and say I've been like super lucky with my photographers. When I was living in Buffalo, New York, I used Casey Kratt. And mostly I've been going through, former faculty or friends. I know that there's a lot of hotshot photographers in New York that'll charge you $100 to $200, per finished image, and those are pretty easy to find, I think, through the jewelry community. But really, since I've been in Baltimore especially, I've really been going to every single opening, every single event, and if I see a photography exhibition, I'm going to go to it. And that would be a really great way that I would recommend. Or if other folks are using, models in this way, asking them, who shoots your work? That's just how I've kind of fallen into it, and I just keep showing up and trying to figure it out. It seems to work, is just showing up.
My name's May Kennedy. I have been doing kind of fashion jewelry for about 10 years, and I definitely have had my share of coverage in the media, but for me, that's definitely not necessarily translated into actual sales.
Fair enough.
So I'm wondering, other than, vlogging about the fact that somebody in a show is wearing your jewelry or that it got covered on something, is there some other way to really kind of hammer that home for people? Do you guys have any extra hints about that?
I've seen in a lot of, I don't know if you have your own shop, or even on a lot of websites having a press page, and definitely, social media, tweeting about it, Facebooking about it, kind of putting it out there as much as possible. But that's kind of the unfortunate thing about looking to gain exposure is one thing, but actually having people come to you after that exposure is definitely another. And I know we've experienced it with the website as well, where I do talks and I go on television, and I've been on national television I don't know how many times, but it might not necessarily translate to readers. So it's kind of a luck of the draw, to be honest. I don't know if there's any real formula for that.
I guess I have a point with that too. I forgot to mention about making as part of making a living. Galleries, if you can find a really great gallerist who really likes and supports your work. I was just taken over to Design Collective. Well, I wasn't, my work was. And the few galleries that I'm at, some of them work hard, but one of them works really, really hard to sell the work. She's totally great. So I would say, be on consignment at as many places as possible. A lot of the shops that I'm at do really good at selling, especially the lower price range, like $50. And then when you can get people to purchasing those smaller pieces and a loyal clientele at the places where you're consigning, then sometimes they'll come back and they'll buy something that's more expensive. So that's actually been working okay.
It's also how conducive your website and your property is to selling and purchasing items. So that's something to think about. If they come, they see it's easy, you recognize that piece with that article or that picture, those are ways to get your conversion rates up on visitors.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, everybody.
This concludes the lecture Purple Cow Documentation via Video and Photography by Rachel Timmins from the 2013 SNAG Professional Development Seminar titled Sacred Cow, Purple Cow, Cash Cow. There are 5 additional presentations with recorded audio. An introduction to our topic is Sacred Cow, Purple Cow, Cash Cow by the organizers Andy Cooperman, Bridget Martin, and myself, Harriet Estelle Berman. The Unexpected Purple Cow, Pop-Up Stores and Alternative Exhibition Space by Natasha Granitstein. Bringing the Purple Cow to Market, Tapping into the Experience Economy by Laura Bazant. Justin Hartzman and Jeremy Pariah from the All You Can Eat website speaks about Customizing the Cow, New Trends in Cross-Platform Web Optimization. Michelle Bilodeau, fashion editor, addresses the topic of 10 tips for catching and keeping an editor's attention. These presentations are all from the SNAG Professional Development Seminar that takes place each year during the SNAG conference. The presentation sponsors are SNAG, the Society of North American Goldsmiths, and MJSA, Manufacturing Jewelers and Suppliers of America. Look for all 6 presentations from the Sacred Cow, Purple Cow, Cash Cow on the Professional Development Seminar page. There are 2 locations, and the links are really long, so this slide has 2 tiny URLs for finding this information. There are 21 slide presentations with audio from past professional development seminars, in addition to a selection of handouts. This information is available for the arts and crafts community on the Professional Development Seminar page found on the SNAG website and my website. Ask Harriet offers additional material on many of the topics developed during the PDS. Contact me anytime with comments and questions or suggestions for future professional development seminar topics.